Irotoridori no Sekai, usually shortened to Iroseka and localized as The Colorful World by Nekonyan, is a visual novel developed by the company Favorite. If the name Favorite and the art style look familiar, that's because the developer of Iroseka is the same one who made Hoshizora no Memoria, a decently popular emotional moege that has had a fan translation for 10 years and recently got an HD official translation in the early 2020s. I'm sure many people jumping into this review are previous readers of Hoshimemo and want to know how similar Iroseka is. To briefly get out of the way, I would say the two are mostly not the same. Outside of sharing the same art style, a ghost girl, and anime harem humor style from the mid to late 2000s, I actually think Iroseka is a whole different beast from Hoshimemo. There's definitely no Chinami equivalent in Iroseka, so you won't be called Oni-chan 10,000 times before you're done with the story. And the drama style, setting, and themes are a lot different. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to judge Iroseka by its own merits. The first major aspect of Iroseka I want to talk about is its pretty interesting setting. Despite most of the characters being high school age, which is kind of to be expected of most Japanese-made visual novels, this is not a slice-of-life high school romance story at all. In fact, I think it would be fair to say that at most, the major characters are shown at school like maybe 20% of the time. Iroseka mixes this minor high school aspect with a supernatural setting with parallel worlds. These parallel worlds specifically are a huge part of Iroseka's story, as the main character will have many personal reasons for having to travel to or deal with these different areas. I'm not going to go into detail in order to not get into spoilers, but I thought the way they integrated the supernatural stuff was quite well done. It helps give Iroseka a unique identity, but while still having a huge focus on relatable psychological character drama. I also liked how they slowly built up the powers that Yuma, the main character, and his ghost girl partner Shinku are capable of as the story progresses. Speaking of which, the next major aspect I want to talk about related to Iroseka is the fact that it has very memorable, emotional, and even depressing moments. And I am not exaggerating when I say depressing. Even as early as towards the end of the common route, you're going to see some stories that delve into pretty heavy subject matter, including but not limited to lost memories, loneliness, depression, revenge, terminal diseases, extreme self-sacrifice, physical abuse, trafficking, the dark side of traditions, etc. If any of these sound like potential triggers for you, I would recommend not reading this visual novel. That said, I think the way that Iroseka delves into these subject matters is pretty tasteful. You're not going to see some stupidly thrown in edgy H scenes for shock value like some eroge fall into. Quite the opposite. In fact, the visual novel goes heavily into the psychology of each character's mindset as the stuff they have gone through, and I think the way that's both presented and how the characters develop from these are quite good and what really got me to quite like a good amount of this visual novel. One of the best things about Iroseka is its overall excellent presentation. If you didn't know, it was a visual novel that was first released in Japan in 2011 and recently got an HD re-release in Japan in 2022. I've always adored the art style of visual novels by the developer Favorite for their bright colors, very distinct character designs, and really good CGs. But I would say the absolute best thing about the presentation in Iroseka is the music. The composer, Shinobu, composes background music for basically every Favorite developed visual novel, including Hoshimemo, Iroseka, and the currently untranslated Sakura Moyu. But the real stickouts are the emotional songs. As stated earlier, there are some moments in Iroseka that are quite emotional, and the excellent background music helps the emotional scenes become even more enjoyable and immersive. One thing that people could have mixed feelings on Iroseka is its heavy use of flashbacks and exposition. As stated earlier, this is a visual novel with a pretty big emphasis on the supernatural and parallel world elements, so there's going to be a lot of stuff that needs to be explained. And the writer definitely wants to make sure to describe the many worlds and characters you will meet, including many minor characters' backstories. To give an example, in my personal favorite girl, Kana's route, a good portion of the beginning of the route is giving a whole hour flashback of a side character that's only tangentially related to Kana. The flashback is incredibly important for the themes of the story, so I definitely did not mind this, as well as a lot of the exposition of the supernatural stuff by the dorm daddy Shigure. They are definitely important to know, and I was personally interested in what they had to say. But if you're not a fan of exposition and backstory heavy stories, you could maybe think twice before picking up this title. But I thought the author did a good job of not getting too long-winded, and a lot of these scenes actually really helped me get into the world and the characters and story even more than I already was. A common noted flaw about Iroseka is the fact that it has pretty inconsistent route quality. If you didn't know, Iroseka has a pretty commonly used locked true route structure, meaning you have to read the 4 side heroine routes before you unlock the true route. I personally recommend reading the side routes in the relative order that I did: Kana, Mio, Tsukasa, and then Kyo's. Kana's is generally considered the best side route and is become one of my personal favorite nakige style routes in isolation. The other side routes are much more hit or miss. Kyo's has a big plot element that isn't resolved, Tsukasa's is way too short despite having an interesting concept, and Mio's is decent but just doesn't hit as hard as I think it should. Basically, I think that the core message and themes of each route are actually pretty good. It's just the amount of care and time given to developing them varies. As for the true route itself, many people cite it as the reason to read the visual novel, and I can certainly see why. It has very memorable emotional nakige moments and some crazy reveals that happen as early as 15 minutes into the route. However, and this may be an Ange Pinion hot take, but I have much more mixed feelings about the true route than I expected to. Similar to the other 4 routes, I think the core message and themes are actually pretty good. However, they come at the cost of some of the details, logic, and loss of quality in the characters. Without getting into spoilers, the issues I have with the true route can be boiled down to 3 things. 1. The plot was trying too hard to be a supernatural nakige that's too creative. 2. A few characters' actions and stories not making much sense or just flat out stupid. 3. Some reveals recontextualizing certain aspects of the side routes in a negative way, especially Kana's, where if you noticed earlier I said her route is one of my favorites in isolation. However, I do recognize my opinion is likely unpopular as many people love this game purely for the true route. So if you like emotional supernatural nakige stories, you'll most likely like this true route because in all fairness, there are many moments that do hit hard. Apparently, a lot of the route-specific flaws I have with Iroseka get fixed in the currently untranslated sequel, Irotoridori no Hikari, or The Colorful Light. People I've talked to cite the sequel as extremely important for filling in a lot of the gaps and details Sekai skipped in order to tell its relatively simpler emotional narrative. So if you're interested and like Iroseka and want to see more, be sure to monetarily support The Colorful World on Steam or your favorite non-DRM store of choice like Jast or Manga Gamer. Unfortunately, there's one huge flaw that I personally cannot overlook, and I've been very outspoken about before, which is the mediocre to bad humor. As I stated earlier, this visual novel has comedy that's very reminiscent of the mid to late 2000s anime harem style comedy. Expect a lot of pervert jokes, including, but not limited to, accidentally walking to a girl changing, girls calling the main guy a pervert when he didn't do anything, or the heroines making fun of the protagonist having a supposed fetish that he clearly does not have, like being a lolicon, being into femboys, or stuff like that. I've never liked this humor, and there were many times where I had to take a break because I was getting really mad whenever these scenes popped up, especially when they happened after pretty important emotional scenes. That said, the absolute worst offender is the protagonist's mentor, Suzu. The writer likes to just write her off as a tease character, but the fact that she's a lazy, immature person for much of the story is quite annoying. Anytime she makes a mistake, she always tries to dump the blame on the main character, Yuma, or worse, try to get him to do things that get him in a situation for the other girls to get unfairly angry at him. As I said earlier, since this is an old humor style where the main character always has to be the punching bag for the harem for humor, while Suzu almost never gets repercussions. It's unfortunate since the rest of the visual novel is quite good, but these main character punching bag humor scenes alone ruin motivation for me potentially doing a full reread of Iroseka in the future, so I'd most likely just speed read through these. This type of humor is something the developer favorite likes to do all the time, as they did this a lot in Hoshizora no Memoria, and from the little I read of Sakura Moyu by same company and writer, appears like he continues to do the same thing there. If they just removed the vast majority of this type of humor, I would like this visual novel a lot more. A few silver linings related to Iroseka's humor is that the bad humor is mostly in the common route, and the visual novel can be funny and unique at times, with me personally liking Kana and Tsukasa's goofy gags and Kyo's occasional game visual novel references. That about wraps up my thoughts on Irotoridori no Sekai, The Colorful World, Irosekai, whatever you want to call it. It has some of my favorite emotional nakige moments and routes in any visual novel, overall excellent presentation, and tastefully well-executed heavy, depressing themes. However, the inconsistent route quality, slight overuse of flashbacks, and especially the bad comedy prevent the title from becoming an all-time personal favorite of mine. Thankfully, I definitely still like and wholeheartedly recommend this visual novel for anyone looking for a memorable, emotional, melancholic, and thought-provoking story about dreams and memories, as long as you don't mind the heavy use of flashbacks and supernatural elements. Overall, I would give The Colorful World an 8 out of 10.